Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I am Mike Leon, but I'm not flying solo today. Nick Savary is on vacation. Joining me is the veteran journalist, award-winning journalist, former MSNBC, CNN, Fox News host. He's the host of the Rick Sanchez Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. My buddy, Rick Sanchez. Rick, good to see you.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, how was that intro? You wrote most of it. How was that?
That was great, Mike. Always good to see you as well, my friend.
On the program today, Rick, we're going to get into a lot of stuff happening today because the Georgia runoff is coming up this week, the last remaining seat that's up for grabs this election season. We're going to react to Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock's final message to Georgia voters, how this is going to affect the upcoming Senate, plus later on the program. Speaking of the chambers of Congress, we're going to look at some of the new look leadership for 2023, the House Democrats electing Hakeem Jeffries. Meanwhile, Republicans a little iffy on the Kevin McCarthy part. To quote the band Lifehouse, they're kind of hanging by a moment here. And then later on in the program, Fox News contributor, former State Department spokesperson Marie Harf is going to be joining me. We're going to break down some other stuff happening with the former president, speaking of the GOP. Rick, first I say hello to you. Normally I would say hello to Nick, and Nick's on vacation. He's out there in Orlando, so he's not that far from us, you and I, where we're recording. But how are you doing? Tell me everything of what you're doing over on the Rick Sanchez podcast for the people that don't listen to you, don't know you. I can't imagine they don't. You've been in television for close to 30 years. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
There's a lot of people out there who are now no longer in their 80s, so they don't know who I am. So yeah, I grew up in Cuba, refugee, grew up super poor in a barrio. My parents never made more than $10,000 combined income. I ended up being a journalist. I got a football scholarship to go to Minnesota. While there, CBS News said, you want to try this journalism thing, and we're going to give you a scholarship if you apply and if you do it. So I did, and I ended up becoming a television journalist. I was the first Latino journalist in the United States with his own primetime show.
That's right.
Worked at CNN, worked at Fox, worked at RT, worked at Univision. I mean, I've worked in different countries and different languages. I've interviewed Presidents Reagan and Carter and Clinton and Obama and Gorbachev and Castro and Noriega, and I've won like 3 Peabodys and 5 Emmys covering news.
Just a small amount of awards there that I've seen over at the trophy case there at the house.
At the Sanchez Ranch.
The ranch.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I can't think of anyone more overqualified to replace Nick Savary while he's on vacation as we analyze some of the topics making headlines. Let's get into our first segment, Rick, because it's going to feed in perfectly because you and I, once upon a time, we talked about before the election happened, some of these candidates, specifically the MAGA candidates, the right-wing Republican candidates that were going up against more moderate-leaning Democrats. Well, in Georgia, we have a perfect example right now because this Georgia runoff that's happening this week, if you're listening to us on a Tuesday morning, the runoff is about to happen this week. Early voting has already happened in Georgia and it's underway. Go out to the ballot. You know how important Nick and I stress going out there to vote. You can go to vote.org to find out more about your precinct and where you can actually vote. But in terms of the Georgia runoff, the candidates were giving their final messages to voters over the past couple of weeks. And I want to play some sound for you here, Rick, and when it gets some reaction on the other side. Herschel Walker was recently with Maria Bartiromo, a friend of you and I's on Fox Business. She was asking him about what are some of the issues that are important to him. And then Raphael Warnock was on Pod Save America over at Crooked Media, giving his final message to Democratic voters. Take a listen to this.
Well, one of the places I stand is we got to be energy independent again. They've waged war on domestic energy. And I think that is a national security problem because right now we can do things right underneath our feet, but they've tried to pretend like this is a new normal, that there's other people that can do it better. No, they can't. They're going to dictators. They're going to people that are our enemies, people that chant death to America. They ask for energy. And they don't know the definition of enemy. They don't know the definition of a dictator. It can be done right here.
I'm not just a candidate. I'm not just a senator. I'm also a citizen. And I have to say, I can't have Herschel Walker representing my mother. It matters. And I think integrity matters. I think truth-telling matters. I think character matters. And here's a man who can't even tell us the truth about the basic facts of his life. Claimed to have been a police officer. He's not. Claimed to work for the FBI? He did not. Claimed to be valedictorian of his class? He was not. Claimed to have graduated from the University of Georgia? Did not. Claimed to have started a not-for-profit that helps veterans. As it turns out, he didn't start it. It's not a not-for-profit. And rather than helping veterans, it literally exploited veterans, and they had to be called to task for that. Is that somebody you want to trust?
A lot to digest there. Before I get your takes on both of candidates saying stuff there to the different media outlets, respectively, I saw a CNN poll recently, an exit poll, about 52% of Herschel Walker voters. 52% said their vote was mainly to support Herschel Walker. These are of the people that were surveyed. So that means about 48% of folks surveyed said that the only reason they were voting for Herschel Walker was to oppose Raphael Warnock. Right. Warnock supporters broadly were casting their votes at an 83-17% clip. What do you make of the way some of these candidates, you just heard Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. I was watching you as we were both listening to that. But what do you make of character, integrity, and what it really means in this election cycle? Warnock mentioned it there. When I hear Herschel Walker talk and I hear Raphael Warnock talk about the different issues, I didn't think that this would be as close as it should be. You and I can't think are on the same page about that, but I would love to get your takeaways on it.
Well, it's actually not close. It's not even close to close. But then again, I'm making that analogy based on American politics, where 52 to 48 is a landslide. It's a weird world and a weird country that we're living in right now. It's really looking like Herschel Walker is going to get his clock cleaned. I lived in Georgia. I have a lot of friends in Georgia. I got people who are voting in Georgia, and they're reporting back to me. And what they're telling me is it's total Democrats at the polls. The sense of energized voters in most of the polls, in most of the places, all of the numbers, forget the polls. I mean, the polls, that they do to try and determine who's going to vote for who, forget that. Just look at who's voting and where and how big are their numbers. In all the Democratic precincts, they're breaking every record that's been set for the last 20 years. And in the Republican precincts, it's kind of like a big yawn. Fact of the matter is, I just saw a poll that said that Republicans are embarrassed, generally speaking, to vote for Herschel Walker, while Democrats are enthusiastically voting for Warnock. So it just doesn't look good. I mean, and you mentioned issues. Forget issues. This thing is not about issues. The only thing that really matters in this race at this point, and even Republicans. I mean, most of the Republicans who have been interviewed, Republican leaders even, are saying that they're having a tough time with this Herschel Walker candidacy. And when you hear McConnell and when you hear others in the Senate say, we've got to, in the future, be more careful about allowing who chooses our candidates, they're talking about Herschel Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, they're talking about Herschel Walker. So
yeah, I was just going to ask.
This is not looking good for Team R.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you because I was looking at the AP in terms of, because the House is still, according to the AP, not decided yet. There's still one seat up for grabs. But if you just look at the notable races and the percentage points that folks have won by, you alluded to 52-48 being a landslide. This is just me just reading the top 10 House races, right? Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, and all of these folks won by 50.4%, 50.2%, 51.5%, 50.4%, 48.4%. Do you think that says that the voters out there have looked at these candidates and said, I'm picking the lesser of evils. I don't want either of you guys. I want somebody that's kind of listening to our issues, because the candidate integrity part, you mentioned it, and McConnell spoke about it. We can't have folks like Herschel Walker. Unfortunately, we put him up, but we need better candidate integrity. And then I look at the numbers and it's like, well, why is everything so close then?
Yeah, well, because both parties basically hold their nose even when they have a bad candidate and still vote for their party. And that's the kind of country we live in right now. You and I talk about this all the time. We live in a siloed society where people live in their silos. This is the first time I've seen a candidate come across who was actually so bad, such a bad candidate, God bless his heart, that he's actually broken the silo effect. What we saw in the midterms was that Republicans wholeheartedly went out and voted for Kemp, their governor. They love the guy. They voted for him in spirit. They voted for him in person. They did everything possible to make sure they're going to support him because they're Republicans and they like him. The same people who voted for Kemp, a large measure of them, and I don't have the number in my head, but I did, but I'm getting old and I forget. A large number of those people who voted for Kemp decided not to vote for Herschel Walker. That doesn't mean they voted for Warnock. They just didn't vote. They just said, I'm going to skip that race. Is it possible that Herschel Walker has really put them off? Oh, of course it is. I mean, the Georgia's a very religious state. It's a part of the Bible Belt. And the fact that he had a lot of children out of wedlock that are in pretty legitimate reports, that there are lots of reports out there that he paid for abortions. I mean, these things don't sit well with Georgians. And yeah, most of them will say he's one of the greatest football players who ever played for the Georgia Bulldogs. And he really was, but he hasn't served himself well as a candidate, unfortunately.
I agree a lot with all of what you just said. It's very interesting to me because I don't know. We had Jeff Pearlman on the program, the New York Times bestselling author. Jeff has written a fantastic book about the USFL. He's done another book about the Dallas Cowboys. And in both of those books, Herschel Walker was a part of both of those books. And we asked him straight up, like, what do you think about Herschel Walker? And he's like, I don't think people understand how Herschel Walker has always been routine based and he listens to other people. He doesn't really have his own opinions. His personality is kind of formed from like what people tell him to do. He's always been run the football against Georgia Tech. Like never been. And that was Jeff's quote. It made us laugh on the show. And we're sitting here going, then why is it so close? I want to get back to you for a second, because I looked at the numbers. The third party libertarian candidate in November got 81,000 votes. And this is why we're going to the runoff, because neither person reached the 50% threshold. I think it gets back to what you and I were talking about of these folks went out there, they went down the ballot and they really itemized. I'm voting for Kemp. Right. I'm voting for this, but I am not voting for that. Correct. And I feel like a vote for, what do you make of people voting for a third party candidate? And knowing that has no chance and no bearing and no impact on the United States Senate, but basically saying, I'm going to do everything down the ballot, looking at issues, candidates, boom, check. And here's a waste of a vote for, I forget the guy's name, the libertarian candidate down there.
I'll tell you how I feel about that, Mike.
Yeah.
I wish to hell that we lived in a country where we had more than two parties.
Yep.
I hope someday before I die, I will look at a ballot and I will see 4, 5, 6, 7 different parties being represented, because that means that there are fewer chances for the establishment, for the elites, for the moneyed and part of our country to control the two parties that are there now, because they do control them. So if we finally one day get to a point where we can expand the base of candidates, it'll make it harder for corporations to buy the two candidates that are there. There's a reason we have two candidates, because that makes it easy for, unfortunately, God, I hate to say this, I love my country as much as you do, but the idea that today there is a legal form of bribery when it comes to politics, and don't you think for 1 minute that the big corporations don't know that? And unfortunately, that's why we end up with guys like you and I who go and sit in the ballot box, and sometimes we're in a quandary thinking, do I vote for this guy or that guy or this gal and this or this gal? And is there really a difference? Many times I don't know. In the case of Herschel Walker and Warnock, there's obviously a pretty clear difference. One of them, is somewhat competent as a human being and has, the ability to reason, and the other one kind of doesn't. And that's even obvious to a lot of Republicans. And that's what we're seeing in this case. And good for those Republicans for even recognizing that, because there are Democrats who don't recognize the flaws of some of their own candidates as well.
I would agree a lot with that. Let's get into the overall Democrats and Republicans part of this, because I was mentioning to you, we were talking about what we're going to talk about in this first segment. And now after this Georgia runoff, this is the last seat open here in the Senate. I don't think there's any recounts so far going on. I know there was a couple that were supposed to be scheduled and got canceled in Colorado. But now the House is going to be probably 221 or 222 to 213, 214, depending upon that final race that I was mentioning before. And now the Senate will either be 50-50 with Democrats having Kamala Harris as the vote there, or 51-49. So the New Look Congress in 2023, it's got a lot of legislation that they're going to be acting upon. And already I've been seeing the House has elected Hakeem Jeffries to replace Nancy Pelosi as the minority leader. And Republicans are kind of stuck right now because they don't know if they want Kevin McCarthy. There's a faction of the party that wants him to go in polar directions. I want to play some sound from Hakeem Jeffries and Kevin McCarthy for you and get your reaction on the other side, because both of these guys are kind of saying the right things. And within there, Kevin McCarthy says something that I thought was pretty interesting. Take a listen to this.
We look forward to finding opportunities to partner with the other side of the aisle and work with them whenever possible. But we will also push back against extremism whenever necessary.
Rick,
Look at that.
Yeah, I knew that would get a rise out of when I heard him say that on Fox News. I was very interested in that. But one thing I wanted to touch on there, we just talked about it, how low the percentages were for some of these races. It almost is like the country is saying, you guys need to work together because this guy or gal makes sense for this role. This guy or gal makes sense for that role. And it doesn't matter about R&D. Both of them talked about bipartisanship. Where do we see it? Like, what do you see as the future now if both of these guys are the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and Hakeem Jeffries? How are we going to work together? Because you mentioned about how siloed we are, yet the voters are saying something different. Hey, figure this out. You guys and gals need to work together.
Well, but in this case, we're talking about three silos, though, Mike, right? We're talking about Hakeem Jeffries, who pretty much is going to represent the Democratic silo. And then you got the Republican side, which is separated into two silos, which is the Trump silo and the non-Trump silo. And it's really hard to draw that line between those last two. It really is. I would hate like hell to be Kevin McCarthy. I would hate like hell to be Kevin McCarthy. I mean, what do you do? I mean, he has to be beholden to Trump and to the crazies in the party. He knows they're crazy, but he's not allowed to say they're crazy. Those folks are powerful, and with the big badass Donald Trump, they know that at any moment they could set him off, and then he's going to go after whoever, and that's how he's able to form coalitions. He's so strong that in some districts, in most Republican districts, he can have you primaried, he can have you humiliated. Look, Donald Trump is a guy who, when he was running Trump, he would call his managers in, guys, and he would not tell them, you know this story, right? He would not tell them that their wives were on the phone. He would tell their wives to sit on the phone, and he would mute them, but they were listening. And then he would bring them in, and he would ask them about their girlfriends, about their sexual encounters, and get them to say everything they possibly could, knowing that their wife was listening to them so that he could hold it over them. He has absolutely no shame, and he is very targeted when it comes to his opposition. We know that, right? Little Marco, Little Low Energy Jeb, Lying Ted. I mean, we can go down the list. So everybody in the Republican Party, including McCarthy, knows that if they step out of line, Trump could destroy them. And if they can't destroy them, they can destroy their coalition. So what do you do? I mean, what the hell do you do if you're Kevin McCarthy to fight your way through that and try and build a Republican coalition? I'm just left thinking, good luck. How are they going to do that?
Well, let me ask you, putting your journalist hat on, because I've seen a couple of congressional reporters. We've had a few on the show, but I saw Manu Raju asking similar questions. How would you approach asking Kevin McCarthy that question, and then also interviewing and pushing back on MAGA candidates? You and I talked about this once upon a time with Carrie Lake. If you were to had the opportunity to interview her, what you would say in presenting fact and reason. Well, here Now these people are already elected, right? And here's Kevin McCarthy has to go up there and speak knowing that he's got 30 to 40 loonies, crazies in his party that are clamoring for XYZ. Like, how do you interview both? And how do you get the answers that the American people need with keeping them, within the factual lines?
You know what I would ask Kevin McCarthy if I was a journalist? Heaven forbid I went back into my field that way. But if I was a journalist working on the Hill and I had an opportunity to ask him or McConnell or any other Republican leaders, I would say, why is it that Donald Trump still holds the mantle? Why isn't there anyone in this party who is strong enough, has the leadership skills to rip that away from them and get the American people to trust and follow them instead? Is it that he is that strong, or is it that you guys are that weak? And if it's the latter, what should the Republican Party do to find that woman or that man who would finally be able to stand up and say, this is the course we have to go on? I mean, it's mind-boggling to think that everybody knows they're following a stooge and nobody can somehow stand up and beat the stooge. So what does that say about you? What does that say about the party? I just can't help but wonder.
Well, let me ask you, 2024, the Republican candidate for president of the United States is?
Donald Trump.
It's Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean, of course, DeSantis is in the game, but I mean,
let me get your opinion. Can I get your opinion on DeSantis? We're both Florida residents.
Sure.
You've covered governors in this state. You've been a longtime journalist in this state for WSVN here, Channel 7. What do you make of DeSantis overall, some of his policies, how he can actually speak to a broader base nationally?
I think he's going to be great. I think he's a strong candidate. I think he's got real skills. I think he's played that woke mind game so well. I think you remember who votes in America, right? It's not teens and 20s, right? The people who vote in America are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? So you go to that group of people, that specific demographic, and all you got to do is come up to them and say, can you imagine a boy in your high school becoming a girl just so he could be on the volleyball team and then take your daughter's position on that volleyball team or granddaughter's position on that volleyball team? That's it. End of conversation. He's going to vote for you. Can you imagine your 4-year-old in kindergarten or in first grade, even though this may not really even be happening, but it doesn't matter. It makes for a great argument. Can you imagine them being told that they should really consider a lifestyle as a different sex than what they are and that they're not really a boy? I mean, this is how this guy's going to win. He's literally going to rip the heart of America, take everybody who possibly is in the middle and make them anti-woke. And that's what he's done to become one of the most popular governors in the history of Florida. He's smart about the way he does that. And he stays in that area. He doesn't go where Trump goes. He's not a race. He doesn't become racist or anti-Semite or anti-women or anti-Muslim. He doesn't necessarily go there the way Trump does. He stays in that very safe space that he thinks will get him elected. I think it will too.
Yeah. Very well said, Rick. I can't thank you enough for holding down this first segment while my partner's at Disney World right now, probably riding some roller coaster. I don't know what he's doing, but when he gets back, he's going to get a stern talking to. You can check out the Rick Sanchez podcast wherever you get your podcast. Longtime MSNBC, CNN, Fox News host, and my buddy Rick. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
That was a blast. I good, open, semi-intellectual discussions are one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. When we come back after the break, Fox News contributor Marie Harf, my buddy, she's going to be joining me in the second segment. We're going to talk about, here's somebody who ran a campaign. We're going to talk about bipartisanship, and we're going to get into the former president when we come back after the break. All right, I go from an award-winning journalist now to a former government official, a Fox News contributor. She is my buddy, Marie Harf. Marie, welcome to the program. Thank you for filling in for Nick.
I am so happy to be here. The last time we did this together, we were in person in Washington. Right. And I really hope we start off by talking about the biggest news in the country this week, which is that my Ohio State Buckeyes are going to the college football playoffs.
That's
so
right.
Snuck right in there. And, there's a lot going on in the political world that's not great. I am focused on college football for some happiness in this holiday season.
Well, listen, I mean, if you guys listen to my other show on theanalyst.com, I had been high on USC all year, but of course they couldn't avenge that loss to Utah. The Buckeyes happened to move up. Good for TCU, by the way, staying in there. That was a really good game, and I'm glad that Alabama didn't get in. I think the nation is glad that Alabama didn't get in.
Everyone is glad that Alabama, no one is sad except for Alabama fans today.
Exactly. And mainly it's because, hey, Alabama, look inward. It's the guy leading the program.
Exactly.
But anyway, let's talk about a state next to Alabama, Georgia. Oh, what a segue, Mike. That is really
good. With
a
college football player in the, there's lots of segues here.
That's right. You just heard Rick and I in the previous segment, we were talking about the Georgia runoff and everything that's happening there. We have a reporter coming on later on this week that will be filling in for Nick, that we're going to, kind of summarize everything that happened in Georgia once the results are out. But real quick, high level for you, candidate integrity. We played some sound bites in the first segment of both guys kind of giving their sign-off messages to Georgia voters. What are you expecting to happen Tuesday? And can you talk about how important it is? There's been a lot of Democrats messaging that, oh, we don't even need Georgia. We don't even need, you do need Georgia. It's incredibly important to get this seat in the Senate for both parties. And can you explain why, Marie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right. It's much better to have 51 than 50 for a whole bunch of reasons, some arcane Senate rules. And look, if one senator gets sick, it's nice to have another one that they can vote. But, I think what's interesting in this runoff is that all of the external factors have gone away, right? It's not control of the Senate. Brian Kemp isn't on the ballot. Donald Trump isn't on the ballot. There's not a governor's race. There's not, nothing is hanging in the balance except for these two men running against each other. Right. And so I actually think in this case, because none of those external factors are still really at play in the same way that they have been in other runoffs, it's just these two men. It comes down to whether you think they are competent to lead, whether you think they should represent Georgia in the Senate. And by any, I think, metric, Herschel Walker is hurt by that. He is hurt by the fact that Brian Kemp, he may be campaigning for him, but he's not on the ballot. Donald Trump isn't there to help, to try and to lift him on his coattails, although obviously that didn't happen last time. And Republicans can't say to their voters, this is control of the Senate. And so under those circumstances, all of Herschel Walker's flaws are just front and center. And Raphael Warnock is running a really good campaign. I think that he will win on Tuesday. I think that we will get 51 Democratic senators, and Republicans have a lot of soul searching here, my friend. Candidate quality matters. Name ID is not enough. And that is, it bit them in Pennsylvania. It bit them in Arizona. It bit them a lot of places, and it's going to bite them here.
Yeah, I agree. And the numbers bear out on that. I wanted to get your takeaways on something that we had talked about in the first segment. And I want to play another soundbite for you because I was mentioning about the new look House with Hakeem Jeffries now taking over for Nancy Pelosi, and then Kevin McCarthy kind of still struggling internally, but he would probably be Speaker of the House. I can't imagine somebody else rising up to be that, but we'll see how that plays out. But they talked a lot about bipartisanship, both of them recently speaking about, or at least Hakeem Jeffries in his first intro conference was talking about working with the other side of the aisle. Maybe he said that because he's in the minority position. Maybe he didn't. We had recently somebody you worked for once upon a time, Representative Seth Moulton from Massachusetts. I had asked him a question about what bipartisanship looks like, because when he ran years ago against an incumbent candidate up there in Massachusetts, that candidate didn't really reach across the other side of the aisle. But I asked him, how do you deal with that with respect to now what we're seeing with this faction of the Republican Party, the MAGA part of the wing of it, right? The Freedom Caucus, as they like to call themselves. How do you work with people like that? I want to get your response and takeaways after you take a listen to this.
When I first ran, and I was on this, platform of doing more bipartisan work, I was asked by people, well, Seth, how do you work with someone like Ted Cruz? How on earth are you going to work with a Republican like that? And my answer is very simple. You don't. I've never worked with Ted Cruz on anything, and I probably never will. He's useless when it comes to actually working in a bipartisan way to getting things done. But there are still enough Republicans left. Yes, they're dwindling, but there is still enough Republicans left that you can find who actually do want to get things done. And there are people like Chris Stewart from Utah. Now, he's way more conservative than I or any of my constituents or most of my constituents in Massachusetts would ever dream of being. But we found common ground on mental health, largely because of our experience as veterans. And we got a landmark piece of legislation passed because we were willing to quietly work behind the scenes to get it done.
So, Marie, bipartisanship, both, like I mentioned, Seth just mentioned it there. Democrats are in the minority, but the Kevin McCarthy sound that we played before, he said, if we mess around here, we could lose the majority on certain bills. Democrats could reach across the aisle, grab a couple Republicans, and pass some meaningful legislation through the House. What do you make of bipartisanship overall? What should it look like? And what your former boss said there?
Well, I mean, first, that's why I wanted to work for him, right? Because he's not, naive about bipartisanship. It's not, we just need to find common ground with Ted Cruz. Well, there are some people you can't find common ground with, right? But that there are some people you can. And that's exactly why I wanted to work for him and why I'm glad that people like Hakeem Jeffries are talking about bipartisanship. Because I think that under Joe Biden's presidency and the Democratic-controlled House and Senate, we have seen bipartisanship on some issues. Not everyone, and we're still horribly divided. And I think the Republican Party is an extreme party that's not interested in governing all that much. But on some things, we've gotten some Republican votes. Kevin McCarthy, first, can you imagine getting a job like Speaker just because they can't find someone else? Like, he's like there's no more prom dates left. It's like, let's ask Kevin McCarthy to go. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure he's going to get the votes, but even if he does, they don't want him as Speaker. He is not Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi held the caucus together when there was an incredibly slim majority, and I do not think Kevin McCarthy can do that. So to your point, I think if the Democratic caucus stays together, get some of these, some moderate Republicans actually held on in the midterms, they can pass some meaningful legislation. And I so firmly believe that if the Republican Party in the House, they have control of one branch of government, the House, if they think that the 2 years before this presidential election, a winning message is investigating Hunter Biden and doing all these other investigations and not actually governing, that the Republican Party will lose again in 2024. I think one of the lessons of these midterms was people actually like people who are willing to govern and be bipartisan. And they see Biden as doing that. They see the Democrats in Congress as having done that on certain bills. And they punished Republicans who were not seen as actually trying to get anything done or interested in governing. And I think if Republicans, if their closing message for the 2024 elections is Hunter Biden, I mean, the first press conference Kevin McCarthy gave after they took the House was all about investigating Hunter Biden. If they think that's what American voters want, have at it. Look,
Yeah, I mean, I have no follow-up. I mean, because literally 6 weeks ago, I was on television and I said, Hunter Biden is currently under investigation by law enforcement agencies. Let those processes play out. He's a private citizen. There's no need to inject congressional matters into that. Candidate integrity, we've talked about this. Mitch McConnell, in the last segment, Rick Sanchez was talking about, Republicans have said candidate integrity does matter. Well, the former president has been hanging out with Kanye West, Nick Fuentes, a dinner recently. Obviously, he announced his candidacy for presidency in 2024. Mitch McConnell said something recently to reporters about everything that's happening in the Trump universe with respect to meeting with white nationalists and bigots like both of those guys. I want you to take a listen to this. We're going to react on the other side.
First, let me just say that there is no room in the Republican Party for anti-Semitism or white supremacy. And anyone meeting with people advocating that point of view, in my judgment, are highly unlikely to ever be elected president of the United States.
In light of what you said, that there's no room in your party for anyone who harbors these anti-Semitic views, if Donald Trump wins the Republican nomination, would you support him?
Look, let me just say again, there is simply no room in the Republican Party for anti-Semitism or white supremacy. And that would apply to all of the leaders in the party who will be seeking offices.
And then on the Sunday shows, Marie, I know you're throwing your hands up. And then on the Sunday shows, Representative David Joyce, another guy from Ohio, was asked by George Stephanopoulos. He was on ABC this week. And they were asking him about some recent Truth Social messages that the former president had posted. I'm not sure if you've seen these. I'm sure you have, but he reposted about, we should take back the Constitution or at least get rid of it right now because of this New York Post story that was supposedly being suppressed by Twitter and everything that Elon Musk was doing. I want you to listen to what Representative David Joyce, and then we're going to talk about the overall party and denouncing some of this stuff. Take a listen to Joyce and what he said on the Sunday shows.
You can't come out against someone who's for suspending the Constitution?
Well, first off, it has no ability to suspend the Constitution. Secondly,
but he says he's for it.
Well, he says a lot of things but that doesn't mean that it's ever going to happen. So you got to accept exact fact from fantasy. And fantasy is that we're going to suspend the Constitution and go backwards. We're moving forward, and we're going to continue to move forward as a Republican majority and as a Republican conference.
So here's my question to you, Marie, because of the two of us, you're the only one that's worked in government. Of the two of us, you're the only one that's gotten somebody elected into Congress. We just heard his voice earlier. How would you, if you were on the Republican side of the aisle right now, and there's a chance that Donald Trump is going to be the 2024 nominee, clearly right now, and you heard Rick Sanchez said in the last segment, we all think he's going to be, right? Eventually, maybe DeSantis is the only challenger that's capable. How would you message or at least get the person you work for that's in Congress that has an R next to their name? How would you get them to message to denounce what the current leader of the GOP and the candidate for 2024 and presidency, how would you get them to denounce him while also staying within the Republican messaging universe? And then why can't these guys just say Trump meeting with this person is bad, it's vile, these are racists and bigots, and it has no place in this party? And then if he's the candidate in 2024 and he still has those views, Mitch McConnell, you could have added this part, we will not support him. How hard is that to do within the confines of actually working for somebody in Congress? Take us through that.
I mean, look, there are things more important than keeping your job and keeping your seat in Congress. And that sounds sort of Pollyannish, but we saw a lot of profiles in courage step up and say exactly what you just said. Exactly. Plain and simple. Now, most of them lost their seats. Liz Cheney, Pete Meyer, Adam Kinzinger stepped down, right? Tony Gonzalez, former Ohio State Buckeye, right, just tying it all back in here, decided not to run again as well. But I think there are things bigger than politics and bigger than keeping your job. And I feel like we're back in 2015 again. They won't say his name when criticizing him. They won't, hate has no place in our party. Well, okay. Say you won't support Trump. Like, how hard is this? I get, there's someone, Jamel Bowie in the New York Times, I think that's how you say his last name. I'm sorry if it's not, but wrote a piece a couple weeks ago. Like, this wasn't inevitable. A lot of Republicans act like this was inevitable, or they just have to keep doing this. They have to keep supporting him. They have to keep pretending like all of this is somehow normal, and it's not. And if I worked for a member, I would want them to do what Liz Cheney did, or Adam Kinzinger, or else I would quit. This isn't a messaging problem. This is, I often would say this to Seth or to other bosses I've had. Every problem isn't a comms problem. Every problem isn't a messaging. This isn't a messaging problem. There is one acceptable message here. When someone in your party is having dinner with Nick Fuentes, meeting with Kanye, there's one message. And if you can't do it, then you're complicit. And this idea that we will be able to control Trump from inside the party, you remember the adults in the room, the Rex Tillersons of the world, the Jim Mattises, right? Like, that somehow the Republican establishment would be able to control him once he won and tamp down on his most, racist, sexist, misogynist impulses, like, didn't work. Why are we thinking it's going to work now? So it was interesting. I was in the Midwest over the weekend, and my family has a bunch of friends who are Trump supporters. And I talk to them a lot. I've talked to them. They all watch Fox, right? They see me a lot on TV. I've talked to them a lot over the last few years. And for the first time, one of them said he's done with Trump. And I said, why? He said, because he's a loser. He lost us the midterm. And look, if they're abandoning Trump, great. I'm happy. I don't care what the reason is, right? But it's so interesting that it wasn't the racism. It wasn't the insurrection. It wasn't failing at COVID. It was that he's a loser.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I had the same interaction with a friend of mine from Jersey, went to college with me, now lives in the Midwest, said the same thing. It's time to get behind DeSantis. It's time to move him out. And it wasn't in relation to anything prior to this escalator on down. It wasn't anything related to any of that. It was about the fact that they have lost now 3 consecutive elections, or at least this last one being perceived. And it ties into college football, by the way. We don't care about everything that happens within the program as long as we win. Right, Marie? As long as
we win.
Okay.
As long as we win. I think, do we have the same friend in the Midwest? There must be more than one. And this friend actually quoted, I think Chris Christie said it's like baseball, 3 strikes and you're out. He lost us the 2018, us Republicans, the 2018 midterms, 2020 presidential, 2022 midterms. And I thought, like, this is when they're going to turn on him. But like Kevin McCarthy, is there anyone who can compete with Trump? I do not think DeSantis can. I know you know much more about Florida politics than I do. I don't think DeSantis has got it. I don't know if anyone does or will actually, try and take up that mantle. Is Nikki Haley running? Is Kristi Noem running? I don't know.
Yeah, I do know enough about DeSantis to know how incredibly popular he is here. I also think some of that was Charlie Crist, and, former guy, was formerly in this party. Now he says he switched to this party. So I think some of that played into the margin of victory there. If a better candidate had been put up against DeSantis, maybe it's closer, but I still think DeSantis wins. And I asked Rick about this in the first segment, I don't know how he translates nationally.
Right.
Rick talked about some of the woke policies, but then if you saw the article that came out recently about in the Florida courts with respect to that bill, a judge asked him, what does woke policies mean to you? And the definition was actually the definition of what this whole woke thing means. And the judge was like, yeah, well, I'm not buying that, because that doesn't constitute why this bill was written. So when it gets into the legal sector, right, all that stuff gets thrown out.
Right. Well, I also think, you and I talked a lot about the right-wing media echo chamber, and it is real and it is powerful. But one thing I learned from the 2022 midterms is I think a lot of that right-wing media ecosystem started believing their own narrative and thought that there was this, they thought Kathy Hochul was losing. They thought, they thought Patty Murray was losing. They started believing their own narrative. And it was so wrong. And I think that when it comes to DeSantis or Trump or any of this other stuff, I think right-wing, consultants and commentators and that whole ecosystem needs to do some real soul searching, because they were so wrong on the midterms. And I think they might be wrong about DeSantis. I'm not sure he translates nationally. I think he's kind of dopey. I think this whole woke thing, it plays in the right wing, but it doesn't play with independents. And I'm not sure it translates outside of that one very specific audience, Mike.
I agree with you. We've all seen that meme of what Florida is to the rest of the United States. So I don't know how DeSantis does translate. I do want to say, in interest of fairness, though, because you were mentioning some stuff there about strategists and all that, and the red wave and all the narratives on right-wing media. We saw something similar again in 2016. I think 2016 could be an anomaly with respect to Trump, but everybody and their mother was betting on Hillary Clinton. There's no way she's going to lose this, blah, blah, blah. So like in the interest of fairness, because I can already hear one of my friends who's always told me, like a bowling alley, keep it straight down the middle, Mike. And I'm hearing his voice in my head, and he is right. There is something to that. I do want to ask you one final thing here, or a couple of things actually, because I didn't really allude to the Nick Fuentes, Kanye West part of this. White nationalists meeting with a former president. I think that should be a story on the back page for weeks upon weeks, but we don't live in that type of media environment because it's 24/7 now. What do you make of that meeting with a former president? And you just mentioned about right-wing media. You and I both worked on it. You're on it all the time now. And I asked you why you go on it. You gave a really good answer when you came on a while ago. But I think that Nick Fuentes' Kanye West should live on those vast exteriors. We should be pushing this stuff similar to when you're cleaning your gutters, right? Let's push this stuff out. Like, just push it out there, let it live out there. But then there are people that'll say, well, all you did was push it to the floor, right? All you did was push it to the floor. You didn't scoop it up. You didn't throw it away, to keep with the analogy. So what do you make of, first, the former president meeting with somebody like this? And then why are we giving platforms to election deniers and people that have these racist views? Why is Carrie Lake on CNN State of the Union at 9 a.m. being asked about migrants and answering it in a racial manner? Why are we platforming some of this stuff? I know the Alex Jones stuff is separate, but why are some of these networks platforming some of these folks?
Yeah, I mean, look, on the first question, Trump finds common cause with white nationalists. Like, we can just say it. I don't know what's in Donald Trump's heart, but I sure know that he likes a bunch of racists. He says things that sound very supportive of them, and he does things that are supportive of them. And we just need to say it, right? It's not that he didn't know who was coming to dinner. He sees this as part of his base, and he has for a long time. And I think he feels absolutely no shame about associating himself with these people, and in fact thinks they can be helpful to him. He has encouraged them for a long time. And so this idea that, like, well, you can't call Trump racist. Well, I don't know how he feels, but like, he has a bunch of friends who really are quite dangerous. And I think he's been pushed to the fringe even more. And he feels so under siege that he is grasping for supporters anywhere he can. And I think it's like a drug. I think he feeds off of the media attention, and in order to keep getting more attention, he needs to keep doing crazier and crazier things. I'm not even sure he's conscious of it, but it's like he has to keep the circus going. But look, the question about platforming is a really tough one, right? I believe in the marketplace of ideas. I believe that I deeply believe in that concept. But when the rubber meets the road, whether it's on Twitter or Sunday shows, that's a different ballgame, right? Look, I think you have to give, if you are a candidate for governor or the United States Senate, I don't think there's an argument you can make that you shouldn't interview someone. I think you need really good interviewers. You asked Rick Sanchez how he would have interviewed her, right? There are some of these folks. I think that's a really good question. I think that's the responsibility of journalists. How you conduct the interview is the important part there, right? But what social media has done, combined with Trump's permission and encouragement, combined now with Elon Musk going full red pill, right wing, on Twitter, the ugly underbelly of our country, the legacy of racism, anti-Semitism, all of this has just been brought to the surface. And it has encouragement, and it has support, and it has, the militias you see in places like Michigan. This is the greatest national security threat we face today, is domestic terrorism and extremism from the far right. And I believe that, experts believe that, and we are not, I think, focused on it enough, and we need to take it more seriously. Because a former president, who could be the next president, counts them as his supporters. And that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, very well said. I will say one thing. I deviate from you on just this simple point, because Nick made this, he extended the invitation to Lauren Boebert a couple episodes ago to come on this program to discuss gun laws in Colorado. And I said, she is not invited on this program, similar to what your old boss said. She's disingenuous. She's useless. I have nothing to talk to that woman about. It's one thing if the people are on the up and up, right? Facts, fiction, not Mike's facts, not Marie's facts, actual facts. If we can discuss policy around that, cool. And I'm all for that. But when you bring the disingenuous part of this, right, and it's just about social media and placating to that, why am I continuing to give that person air? Let them find air somewhere else down the troughs of YouTube or wherever it is that this stuff lives. I want to leave it there because I want one final thing on your party, the Democratic Party here. And I say your party because I'm a journalist. I'm a host, folks. The Democratic Party, Marie, in 2024, President Biden will be 82 years old, going on 83. Will he be the candidate for 2024? They haven't announced it fully, but they have said that he will be running, but they haven't announced it yet. And I don't know what other qualified Democratic candidates can become president of the United States and maybe challenge somebody that is already walking into 40% of the popular vote with respect to Donald Trump. Who is the 2024 presidential nominee for the Democratic Party?
I think it's Joe Biden. Joe Biden, he beat Trump. He showed that he could do it. And the midterms, I think, really made the Biden White House feel like what they were doing was working. They were getting bipartisan bills passed. They were building a Democratic Party that was not the far left, that was governing from the center. And I think they feel really emboldened by that. He knows how to do it. Elections aren't won on Twitter. Certainly the Biden team will tell you that. And look, Donald Trump's pretty old too. So if I was a betting woman, which sometimes I am, sometimes I play poker, I would say Joe Biden sitting here today.
All right. And I just found out something new, that she plays poker. So she gets my analogy about some of these right-wing folks being pot committed because they've got pocket rockets and the highest card on the flop is a king. All right. Somebody to get my analogy there.
There you go.
Marie, real quick, because you mentioned it about the folks watching you for Fox News and that being Trump supporters. What are some of the other things folks are saying here? Give us a little teaser of what these folks say, because you are from the Midwest. You just mentioned it. A lot of folks vote R, and they've been following Trump for years. You're on the network right now. You've been on the show called Outnumbered, where it's normally 4 Republican voices, conservative voices to 1. Give me some of the feedback. Give the people here. I'm sure there are some people saying, wait. I need to hear more about these combos. What are they saying to you about not only their television appearances, but the country in general?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because I think they come away from it because they know me thinking, oh, she's not crazy. Democrats aren't all crazy, right? But look, what I hear, they are really hot on DeSantis, right? They think he is the future of the party, and they are really, I can't emphasize enough for you what I hear from them about how upset they are about the investigations of Trump, particularly the Mar-a-Lago raid. I had one person tell me over the weekend, that sets this precedent for ex-presidents. And I said, well, but he broke the law. And this person said, according to who? I don't even trust DOJ anymore. So I think there is this, the thing I care about, right, most, which is national security and democracy. Those people, that's sort of where we can't find any sort of common ground together. They believe that the entire intelligence community and Justice Department, justice system is politicized against Republicans and against Donald Trump. And like, some of these people have worked in national security. And I say, look, if you took these documents home, you'd be sitting in jail. But that's where, I really try and find common ground. That is one place that there just is none. But someone this weekend said to me, Mike, they actually think Biden's doing some good things he doesn't get credit for. They mentioned China and Taiwan, standing up for Taiwan. So, it's not, you and I have talked about this a lot. It is not the caricature that everyone thinks it is. Fox viewers aren't, Trump voters aren't, Democrats aren't. And that's why I like to have these conversations, because it's people that I'm friends with. So they, it's a good conversation, but it really shows where those lines are, where those red lines are. And that Mar-a-Lago raid really, I think a lot of Trump support, it really, the facts there really don't matter to people, and it really got to them. And that's been, even this weekend, they brought it up with me again, and that's been really interesting to watch. But, he's a loser now. So that's what I keep hearing from them. And they like that I go on, right? They say, I like, you're a good Democrat. You're a nice Democrat. We like hearing from you. And they name a couple other people as well, Jessica Tarlov and others. And so, they're listening to what I'm saying. That's a win. Yeah.
I love Harold Ford Jr., by the way, too. Another Democrat there.
Yeah, that's right.
Marie, you do fantastic work. You can check out Marie on the family of Fox News programming at the local and national level. She's a former State Department spokesperson, and she also works at Georgetown University. I never mentioned that whenever I'm talking about you. The folks at Georgetown, they're so lucky to have you. Marie, thank you for hopping on the podcast with me, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you so much. It was great.
All right. My thank yous there to Marie Harf, former State Department spokesperson, Fox News contributor. She's the best. I you know how I feel about her. She's the best. Also, thank yous to Rick Sanchez. Speaking of the best, a reason why I got into this industry, seeing another Latino man on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, somebody that did it for a long time at the highest levels. My thank yous to him. Go check out the Rick Sanchez podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Speaking of podcast, how many times can I say that word? Go to YouTube right now. Do me a favor. Type in Can We Please Talk. Hit the subscribe button. You want to see all the video content from our interviews, you can check it out here on our YouTube channel, audio podcast platforms. You know them by now, Apple, Spotify, Google. Shout out to the folks that listen to us on Good Pods. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. We can't do it without them. Can't do it without each and every one of you that listens to this program. Calls, writes in. And when I say calls, you're calling me on the phone. You know who you are. Good, bad, or indifferent. Keep emailing us. Can we please talk podcast at gmail.com. As always, I'm Mike Leon. I got no Nick Savari. We'll see everybody next time. Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.